This is Episode 6, Darfur Conflict, 2003 to 2010 and beyond. Please subscribe, like and share. It helps us reach more people. In the early 2000s, just as the world's attention was fixed on a hopeful peace agreement that promised to end Sudan's long civil war in the south, another crisis was brewing in the country's far west, Darfur. This vast region, roughly the size of France, had long been home to a mosaic of ethnic groups. Most were non-Arab, farming communities such as the Fur, Zagawa, and Masalit, who cultivated the land, while nomadic and semi-nomadic Arab herding groups moved their livestock seasonally across the same terrain. For generations, they coexisted, trading in shared markets and relying on the same wells and grazing paths. But beneath that coexistence lay a deeply embedded imbalance. For decades, Darfur had been politically neglected by the central government in Khartoum. Roads, hospitals, schools, and development projects seen in other regions rarely reached Darfur. Marginalization, economic, political, and social, was a lived reality for its non-Arab communities. Environmental pressures intensified the strain. As desertification pushed southward, fertile land shrank, competition for water deepened, and disputes between farmers and herders grew more frequent and more violent. Weak state presence meant conflicts were often resolved by tribal power or armed retaliation, not law. Meanwhile, the ruling elite in Khartoum had, over the years, increasingly aligned itself with Arab identity politics, reinforcing feelings of exclusion among Darfur's non-Arab majority. When the long North-South civil war neared its end in the early 2000s, many in Darfur waited for similar reforms. They hoped that peace for the South would unlock justice for the West. Instead, their grievances were ignored. The Spark of War, 2003. By 2003, frustration had reached its tipping point. Two armed movements emerged: the Sudan Liberation Movement (ARMY, SLMA, and the Justice and Equality Movement (JEM). In February of that year, they launched bold attacks on government positions, including a high-profile assault on El Fasher Airport, accusing Khartoum of racial discrimination, political neglect, and economic abandonment of Darfur's non-Arab communities. Khartoum responded with a strategy that would devastate Darfur. Rather than simply fight rebels, the government mobilized, armed, financed, and coordinated militia groups drawn largely from Arab tribes, collectively known as the Janjaweed. These militias, often riding horses and camels, became infamous for their speed, brutality, and the terror they unleashed on civilians. Counterinsurgency turned into a scorched earth campaign, targeting not only fighters, but entire communities perceived as sympathetic to the rebels. Government aircraft often bombed villages first, and then the Janjaweed swept in. What followed were patterns of killings, mass rape, burning of homes, poisoning or destruction of water sources, and theft of livestock, the backbone of rural survival. Escalation into atrocity, 2003 to 2005. By mid-2003, Darfur was engulfed in a humanitarian catastrophe. Villages were razed, food stocks destroyed, granaries burned, and people forced to flee with nothing. Between late 2003 and early 2004, some of the most documented atrocities occurred. In Bindisi, August 2003, an attack lasted 5 days, leaving more than 100 dead, including about 30 children, as Janjaweed and government-backed forces swept through the town. In Arawala, December 2003, women were reportedly tied to trees and raped repeatedly as a weapon of terror and humiliation. In Mukja, Gasila, and Dalig, March 2004, more than 200 Fur men and community leaders were rounded up, detained for days, and executed. Families were forced to watch or were told to return to collect the bodies. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic pattern that prosecutors would later present as crimes against humanity and possibly genocide. Villages emptied at an alarming pace. By 2004, over 2 million people had fled, either to makeshift camps inside Darfur or across the border into Chad. The camps quickly became overcrowded, disease-ridden, and short of food and clean water. the threat of starvation loomed even larger than the bullets. The world reacts slowly. As images and testimonies finally escaped media and NGO restrictions, a global outcry grew. By mid-2004, terms like ethnic cleansing and genocide began entering official statements. The United States formally declared the situation genocide. Yet, effective action lagged. At the United Nations, internal politics slowed intervention. Resolutions were softened, delayed, or blocked. When UN Security Council Resolution 1556 passed on July 30, 2004, demanding that Sudan disarm the Janjaweed, it passed with 13 yes votes, but China and Pakistan abstained, significantly weakening its moral weight. The geopolitical interests behind the hesitation were clear. China, holding roughly 40% stake in Sudan's main oil fields, was reluctant to support punitive measures that could destabilize the government and risk oil supply. Russia and other states, with arms trade interests, avoided strong action that could affect military contracts. Many African and Arab governments insisted on an African solution-first approach, delaying UN action and leading to the deployment of a small, under-resourced African Union mission, AMIS, that lacked equipment, mandate, and numbers to protect civilians. Meanwhile, armed shipments continued. Even after embargoes were introduced, enforcement was weak. Between 2008 to 2009 alone, China reportedly sold $23 million in artillery, $11 million in tanks and armored vehicles, $1.8 million in firearms, which strengthened Sudan's military capacity. Russian-made rifles and other weapons were also widely used by both government forces and Janjaweed. Attempts at relief and justice. Ceasefires were announced in 2004 and 2005, but each collapsed as fighting resumed in new locations. The African Union mission, though courageous, could not halt the violence. Peacekeepers lacked helicopters, armored vehicles, and even fuel. In some cases, they themselves became targets. In 2007, after years of pressure, the UN approved a joint UNAU mission called UNAMID, which began deploying in 2008 with a stronger mandate for civilian protection. But Khartoum set up bureaucratic barriers, restricted troop movement, delayed equipment clearance, and continued to deny access to massacre zones. Justice efforts moved slowly but eventually made history. In July 2008, the International Criminal Court prosecutor sought an arrest warrant against President Omar al-Bashir, marking the first time a sitting head of state was charged for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The ICC issued the warrant in 2009, with additional charges added in 2010. Other senior officials, including Janjaweed leader Ali Kushaib, were also indicted. Still, arrests did not follow immediately. Bashir traveled to several countries without arrest, highlighting the challenge of enforcing international justice when major powers are divided. A prolonged crisis, 2010s and beyond. Even after global attention faded, people in Darfur continued to suffer. Peace agreements came and went, including the Darfur Peace Agreement, 2006, and later the Doha Document for Peace in Darfur, 2011. But many rebel factions refused to sign, splintered into smaller groups, or returned to armed struggle. Deep distrust meant agreements rarely translated into real change. By the 2010s, Sudan's own political landscape shifted. A new paramilitary force, the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, emerged, drawing heavily from Janjaweed elements. Many of the very individuals once accused of atrocities were absorbed into state structures, gaining uniforms, salaries, and legitimacy rather than punishment. This further complicated efforts at accountability and reconciliation. Hundreds of thousands of displaced people remained in camps, unable or unwilling to return home due to insecurity, occupation of their land, or trauma. Many children grew up in these camps, born into displacement, never having seen the villages their parents fled. Human toll and legacy. By the late 2010s, Darfur had become one of the most recognized humanitarian catastrophes of the 21st century. Death toll estimates vary widely, from 200,000 to more than 400,000, due to lack of access and differing methodologies. Millions were displaced, infrastructure destroyed, farms abandoned, and social bonds shattered. Rape was used strategically to terrorize, punish, humiliate, and break community structures. The psychological scars remain profound. Internationally, Darfur forced painful debates about the meaning of never again. It raised questions about the limits of international law, the politics of intervention, and the reality that economic interests can outweigh human life in global diplomacy. The ICC warrants set important precedents, but delayed action weakened their deterrent power. UNAMID eventually began its drawdown. Although its presence saved some lives and documented abuses, the mission was constrained by politics and lacked the transformative impact originally hoped for. Today, the Darfur conflict stands as a painful symbol of the world's failure to protect vulnerable civilians, an example often cited alongside Rwanda and Bosnia when reflecting on international inaction. It remains a lesson in how deep ethnic inequality, unresolved historical grievances, and politicized identity can tear a nation apart for generations. Darfur was not simply a war. It was a social rupture that reshaped Sudan's political, ethnic, and demographic landscape forever. 2 decades later, the wounds have not healed. Many Darfurists still live in sprawling displacement camps, some for over 15 to 20 years, raising children and even grandchildren who have never seen their ancestral homes. These camps, originally built for temporary shelter, have evolved into semi-permanent settlements where life is marked by overcrowding, food shortages, trauma, insecurity, and limited economic opportunities. Large portions of Darfur's farmland remain occupied, unsafe, or destroyed, preventing families from returning or rebuilding what was lost. The legacy of the conflict continues to fuel instability across Sudan. The same militias that once terrorized villages were never fully dismantled. Some were absorbed into formal state structures, morphing into the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, a powerful paramilitary force that would later play a central role in Sudan's political upheavals. Former Janjaweed commanders, rather than facing justice, gained influence and resources, preserving the patterns of impunity that defined the early years of the war. Violence did not end with the original conflict. In recent years, particularly after the fall of Omar al-Bashir in 2019 and during Sudan's ongoing civil war from 2023, Darfur has once again witnessed horrific levels of bloodshed. The world has seen a resurgence of ethnically targeted killings, mass displacement, and systematic attacks on non-Arab communities reminiscent of the early 2000s. RSF and allied militias have been accused of massacres, mass rapes, and mass expulsions in towns such as El Geneina, where thousands were killed in 2023 alone, and entire neighborhoods belonging to Masalit communities were entered or destroyed. Reports of bodies left in the streets, families executed while fleeing, and refugee flows into Chad have revived chilling memories of the first phase of the genocide. Villages are again being burned. Border crossings into Chad are once again overwhelmed with terrified families carrying what little they can. Aid organizations describe it as the worst violence in Darfur since the height of the 2003 to 2005 atrocities. In some areas, UN and humanitarian agencies have no access at all, leaving entire populations without food, medical care, or protection. Meanwhile, justice remains distant. The ICC issued arrest warrants, and some individuals, like Ali Kushaib, are now on trial, but many perpetrators remain free, and survivors continue to live side by side with men responsible for past crimes. Trauma passes through generations, altering identity and memory. Young people in Darfur grow up with stories of villages wiped out, relatives killed, and bodies unrecovered, shaping how they view Sudan, the world, and themselves. 20 years on, the conflict's legacy is alive not just in history books, but in the daily lives of millions. Darfur is a reminder that unaddressed injustice does not fade, it resurfaces. And when accountability is delayed, perpetrators adapt, rebrand, and return to violence. The world once said never again. Yet today, Darfur remains a powerful question directed at the global community. What does never again mean if the same people can be targeted again, for the same reasons, with the world once again watching too slowly? If you found this episode insightful, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring you more stories that uncover Africa's modern wars and their lasting lessons. In the next episode, we will delve into the Libyan civil wars, 2011 till date. Join us by hitting the notification button. Thank you.